She jumped in front of the Mafia boss when the gun fired. Why would you do that? He whispered Nora Jenkins lived by the clock, but the clock in Ravenshore was always broken. At 27, she was a senior case manager for the Ravenshore Community Reentry Program, a department buried so deep within the city's bureaucracy that most officials forgot it existed. Her office, housed in a damp pre-war brick building smelling of river water and stale coffee, was the last stop for kids the system had already chewed up. She specialized in finding jobs for young men and women whose rap sheets were longer than their resumes. The rain wasn't just falling, it was attacking the city. It hammered the reinforced windows of her office, blurring the gray skyline of the waterfront. It was 4:30 p.m., and her last client, a 19-year-old trying to stick to a warehouse job, had just left. Nora was packing her bag, ready to face the long bus ride home, when the desk phone buzzed. It was Sal, the building's aging security guard. "Miss Jenkins," Sal's voice crackled. "You gotta walk in. Kid says it's urgent. Won't give a name to me. Says he'll only give it to you." Nora sighed, rubbing her temples. Urgent usually meant a failed drug test or a lost bus pass. "Send him up. Sal, I've got 10 minutes. The kid who walked in wasn't one of hers. He was maybe 16, wiry, with restless dark eyes that scanned every exit. He wore a designer track jacket that was soaked through, but he held himself with a sharp, misplaced arrogance. "You the one who finds jobs?" he asked, dripping onto the worn linoleum. "I'm Nora Jenkins. I help people get back on track. And you are—" He hesitated, sizing her up, clearly deciding if she was a threat or a fool. Marco Villani." Nora checked her roster. "No Villani. You're not in the program. Marco. Were you referred—" "No, I heard you're straight. You don't ask questions about— before—" "I ask questions about now," Nora said, sitting on the edge of her desk, signaling the meeting was informal. "What do you want to do? Marco—" The kid's facade cracked. He looked younger, the street-tough demeanor fading. "I need out," he whispered, the arrogance gone, replaced by a raw panic. "My family. They got me working the manifests down at the pier, but the manifests don't match the containers. They're moving stuff, heavy stuff. I don't want to be the guy holding the bag when it goes bad." Nora's blood chilled. This wasn't a kid shoplifting. This was organized. This was the port. "If I get caught, I'm done." Marco rushed on, his words tumbling out. "If I say no, I'm done. I heard you run that vocational program, the welding one. Can you get me in that? Get me out of the neighborhood, please?" Nora saw the desperation. He was just a kid, caught in something way over his head, trying to swim against a tide that drowned men. "If you're serious, Marco, I can make a call. The program is full, but I might be able to pull a string. You'd have to leave the city." "Good," he breathed, genuine relief washing over his face. Nora walked him to the lobby. The rain had momentarily eased, but the sky was a bruised, heavy purple. "Stay clean tonight, Marco. I'll call you tomorrow with—" It happened fast. The sound wasn't a gunshot. It was a rip, like a giant canvas tearing, a black SUV. Windows tinted to oblivion, slowed at the curb. The back window slid down. Nora didn't even see the muzzle flash. She saw the glass of the lobby door explode inward. She reacted before she could think. Her training was for fires and overdoses, not drive-bys. It didn't matter. "Down," she screamed, grabbing the back of Marco's jacket and hauling him backward. She slammed him against the concrete half-wall beneath the mailboxes, throwing her own body over his as a second burst of automatic fire stitched across the brick facade. Plaster and brick dust rained down on them. Marco was shaking. Or maybe she was. "Stay down," she commanded, her voice firm, professional. The voice she used when chaos broke out. She shielded his head with her forearm. "Don't move." The SUV's tires squealed as it sped off into the failing light. Silence rushed in, broken only by the rain and Marco's ragged breathing. Nora fumbled for her phone, her fingers slick with grime. 911, what is your emergency? "Shots fired," Nora said, her voice steady. "Department of Community Renewal, 112 River Street, multiple shots, automatic weapon. We need police and an ambulance. We are secure." They didn't wait long, but it wasn't the police who arrived first, less than 3 minutes later, before the first distant siren could be heard. A different sound cut through the rain, the deep, throaty growl of high-performance engines. A procession of 3 gleaming black sedans materialized from the gloom, pulling onto the sidewalk with an aggressive lack of concern for the law. They weren't patrol cars, they were armor-plated luxury. Men in dark, impeccably tailored suits emerged before the cars were even in park. They moved with military precision, scanning rooftops, doorways, ignoring the 2 people huddled in the dust. Nora instinctively tightened her grip on Marco, pulling him further behind her. These were not cops. The back door of the lead car opened. The man who stepped out was about 35. He wore a charcoal overcoat that probably cost more than her apartment. He wasn't armed, at least not visibly, but he radiated an absolute, freezing authority. His dark hair was short, his jaw clean-shaven, but his eyes were ancient. He ignored the bullet holes. He ignored the shattered glass. His gaze landed on Marco, and the boy visibly flinched, shrinking behind Nora. Then, those cold eyes moved to Nora. He stared at her, still crouched, still shielding the boy. He noted her cheap blazer, her frayed nerves, and the determined set of her jaw. He watched her protectively keeping herself between him and the kid. This, he recognized, was not part of the plan. A civilian, a nobody, protecting his blood. Nora stood slowly, pushing Marco behind her leg. She faced the man, her heart hammering, but her gaze defiant. "He's just a kid," she said, her voice shaking but clear. Nico Veretti took 1 step toward her, stopping just out of arm's reach. The sirens were closer now, but they seemed to be in a different world. He looked only at her. "Your name." His voice was a low rasp, devoid of emotion. It wasn't a request, it was an inventory. He needed to know the name of the woman who had just saved the most valuable asset in his entire organization. The police had been useless. They took her statement, collected shell casings, and treated her like a traumatized witness, their eyes glazing over when she mentioned Marco Villani. By the time they left, the street was clean. The men in suits were gone, and Marco had vanished with them. Nora was left with an incident report number and a throbbing headache. 2 days later, the invitation arrived. It didn't come as a phone call or a letter. It came in the form of a man built like a refrigerator, wearing a suit that cost more than her monthly paycheck. He was waiting by her cubicle when she returned from lunch. Her boss, startled, was hovering nearby. The man was impeccably polite. "Miss Jenkins," he said, his voice a low rumble. He introduced himself as Jax Romano. "Mr. Veretti would like to thank you personally for your assistance." It was not a question. It was a summons. Nora, feeling the eyes of the entire DCR office on her, picked up her bag. "And if I decline," Jax Romano's expression didn't change, but his eyes were hard. "He's not a man who handles rejection well. He'd see it as rude, and you don't want to be rude to Mr. Veretti." The ride to the waterfront was in a sedan so quiet and smooth, it felt like being sealed in a tomb. Nora stared out the window, watching her world of bus stops and delis blur into a landscape of high-end shipping terminals and fortified warehouses. Jax drove, saying nothing. He didn't take her to an office. He took her to a restaurant, or what looked like the service entrance of one. The sign was a discreet brass plaque, "The Vault at Pier 12." Jax led her down a carpeted hallway. The air changed. The scent of river water and diesel was replaced by the rich aroma of aged wood, expensive whiskey, and a faint hint of cigar smoke. They emerged into a room that stopped Nora cold. It was a speakeasy, but one from a forgotten, wealthier era. Dark mahogany paneled the walls, reflecting the low, golden light from unseen sources. A jazz trio played softly on a small stage, the music a velvet blanket over the murmur of quiet conversation. Men in sharp suits spoke in low tones to women in elegant dresses, their jewelry catching the light. This wasn't a bar. It was a court. Her office was fluorescent lights, peeling paint, and the smell of desperation. This was the other side of the city, the engine room, and it ran on power she couldn't even quantify. Nico Veretti was in the largest booth, a curved leather alcove in the back that gave him a clear view of the entire room. He wasn't working. He was holding court. He stood as she approached, a gesture of respect that felt more like a display of control. Jax melted into the shadows behind him. "Miss Jenkins," Nico said, his voice the same low rasp from the shooting. "Please sit." Nora remained standing. "I prefer to talk about what happened, Mr. Veretti, and about your nephew." Nico watched her for a long moment, a faint smile playing on his lips. He gestured to the bar. "A drink, you look like you could use one." "I'm fine. What do you want?" His smile faded. He appreciated directness. "I want to thank you. You saved my nephew's life. That is a debt. My family pays its debts." He leaned forward, the expensive fabric of his suit jacket pulling tight across his shoulders. "I run the logistics at this port, Miss Jenkins, legal shipments, and other things. Marco is family. He is my blood. You put your body in front of him. I need to understand why." "He's a kid," Nora said simply, her voice cutting through the sophisticated hum of the bar. "He was scared, and he asked me for help. That's my job. It's who I am." "A social worker," Nico said. It sounded like an exotic, foreign word in his mouth. "Yes, which brings me to your debt." Nora took a breath, anchoring herself. "You want to repay me? Get him out. Get him away from the port, away from whatever other things you're doing. He asked me for help getting into a vocational program. He wants a different life. Give him that. That's your payment." The jazz trio seemed to hit a sour note. Jax, behind Nico, stiffened, his hand moving slightly inside his jacket. No one spoke to Nico Veretti this way. Nico didn't move. He just stared at her, his dark eyes analytical, searching. He wasn't angry. He was intrigued. He had expected tears, or greed, or terror. He had not expected demands. He had not expected a woman who would stand in his fortress and tell him how to run his family. He finally nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. "Your courage is noted. Miss Jenkins, I will take your request under advisement." He dismissed her with a look. "Jax will see you home." As Nora walked out, the heavy wooden door clicking shut behind her, she felt like she was surfacing from deep water, gasping for the familiar, polluted air of her own life. She didn't see the man in the parked delivery van across the street. He lowered a camera with a long telephoto lens and checked the image. A clear shot of Nora Jenkins exiting the vault. He sent the photo with a text. "Kellen. Veretti's got a new interest, civilian. She looks plain." The reply from his boss, Kellen Drake, head of the Northside outfit, was instant. "Good. Find out who she is. Anything he cares about, we can use." She also didn't see the dark blue government sedan 2 blocks further down, parked near a fire hydrant. Inside, Special Agent Mara Quinn lowered her binoculars. "That's her," Quinn said to her partner. "The social worker from the shooting. She just spent 30 minutes inside Veretti's inner sanctum. He's never mixed his personal life with his business. Never. This woman, she's a vulnerability. She's our lever." Nora only knew that when she got home to her small apartment, the world felt different. 2 days later, she noticed the car. A nondescript gray sedan, parked across from her building. It was still there when she left for work. A different man, reading a paper, was standing near her bus stop. She felt a cold prickle on the back of her neck. Nico Veretti, back in the vault, looked at a similar set of photos on his desk, photos of Kellen's men. Photos of the FCID sedan. He pushed them toward Jax. "Kellen knows about her. So do the feds. She's a civilian, and they've painted a target on her back." "What's the play, boss?" Jax asked. "The feds want to use her. Kellen wants to hurt her," Nico said, his voice flat. "Put a protective detail on her. 2 men, invisible rotation. I want to know every time she crosses the street. They are not to engage unless she is in immediate danger. Keep her clean. Keep her safe." Nora Jenkins, the woman who believed in second chances and rehabilitation, was now a pawn, trapped between the man who wanted to protect her, the rivals who wanted to use her, and the government that saw her as nothing more than collateral. Her world had just become infinitely smaller and infinitely more dangerous. It took 4 days for Nora's terror to curdle into pure, undiluted rage. The first day, she'd dismissed the gray sedan as a coincidence. The second day, she'd noticed the man reading the same newspaper for 3 hours at the coffee shop across from her office. By the third day, she recognized the rotation. There were 2 of them, a day man and a night man. They weren't cops. They weren't junkies. They were professionals. They were his. She felt like an animal in a cage. They didn't approach her. They didn't speak. They just watched. It was a suffocating, silent presence that followed her from her apartment to the bus, from the bus to her office, from her office to the bodega. They were a constant, humming reminder that her life was no longer her own. On the 4th day, she snapped. She didn't call. She didn't text. She took the crosstown bus, her hands balled into fists in the pockets of her thin jacket, and she marched. She walked the 3 blocks from the bus stop to Pier 12, past the diesel-stained concrete and the screech of gulls. The vault was a different animal in the daylight. The glamour was gone, replaced by the mundane smell of bleach and stale beer. Cleaning crews were vacuuming the thick carpets, and a few men in suits, real suits, not party-goer suits, were having a quiet, intense meeting in a side booth. Jax Romano was at the door, as if he'd been expecting her. He held up a hand, his face a granite block of polite refusal. "Miss Jenkins, Mr. Veretti is in a private meeting." "I don't care," Nora said, her voice low and shaking with fury. She pushed past his arm, ignoring the sheer mass of the man. "I'm not a guest, and I'm not leaving." She spotted him in the same back booth, but the scene was different. No low-light seduction. This was work. The table was covered in shipping ledgers, a sleek laptop, and 2 phones. He was in his shirt sleeves, his tie loosened, and he was in the middle of saying something to a subordinate when he looked up and saw her. The entire bar, which had been humming with quiet industry, went dead silent. The vacuum cleaner switched off. The clink of a glass stopped, mid-pour. Nora marched straight up to the table. Nico's associate, a man with a scarred neck, started to stand. Nico didn't even look at him. He just lifted one finger, and the man froze, then slowly sat back down. Nico's eyes were on Nora, a flicker of, not surprise, amusement, a deep, dangerous amusement. "Call them off," Nora said, and her voice was not loud, but it cut through the silence like a razor. "Miss Jenkins," Nico said, leaning back. His voice was a smooth, calm counterpoint to her fire. "This is a surprise. You're a long way from your office." "Why are your men following me?" The associate flinched at her tone. Jax had taken 2 steps into the room, his hand near his jacket. Nora ignored them all. She was focused on the man in the booth. "I asked you a question. Why are your men following me?" "Mr. Veretti." "Sit down," he said. "You're making my employees nervous." "I'll stand," she shot back. "And I'll make them a lot more nervous if you don't give me a straight answer. Call them off. Now." For a full 10 seconds, the only sound was the distant horn of a container ship. Nico studied her. He had seen fear, greed, and desperation in this room. He had never seen a 27-year-old social worker, dressed in a department store blazer, try to dress him down in his own fortress. He found it refreshing. He gestured to the associate. "Go. Take care of that manifest." The man, grateful, almost ran from the booth. Jax remained, a shadow by the pillar. When they were alone, Nico's expression hardened, the amusement evaporating. "You saved my nephew's life," he said, his voice flat and cold. "You put your body in front of gunfire for my blood. That makes you my responsibility. I have to keep you alive." His tone was dry, matter of fact, as if he were explaining a business expense. Nora let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "Keep me alive. Do you have any idea what you've done? Your protection is a spotlight. Mr. Veretti, a man in a suit tailing a social worker. A car parked outside my building for 4 days. You haven't made me safe. You've made me a target. You've painted a bullseye on my back for every rival and every cop in this entire city." He went still. The logic of her words hit him. He was used to his own rules, his own world, where overt protection was a sign of strength. In her world, it was an anomaly, a bright, flashing signal that she was connected to something she shouldn't be. She was right. He had been protecting her in the only way he knew how, and in doing so, had put her in more danger. For the first time, he looked at her not as a civilian he had to protect, but as an equal who had just outmaneuvered him in an argument. "You're right," he said. The admission was so quiet, Nora almost missed it. Jax looked stunned. "A tale is too loud for your world, but the threat is real. Kellen Drake's people saw you. The feds saw you. They all know I value what you did." He leaned forward, lacing his fingers on the table. "So we need a different arrangement. We need to normalize our acquaintance. Make sense." "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about hiding you in plain sight." He reached under the table and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope, sliding it across the polished wood. "My shipping company hosts a charity gala every year, the Riverside Crown. Next Friday, we raise money for Portside community projects." Nora stared at the embossed invitation. "You'll be my guest," he continued. "We met discussing a generous donation to your re-entry program. It's clean, it's public, it's boring, and it lets everyone know you're just a social worker I'm helping, not a secret I'm keeping." She looked from the invitation to his face. "This is your solution, a party. This is my solution," he said. "They can't hurt you if they think you're nothing more than my annual good deed." Nora left the vault with the heavy invitation in her bag, her head spinning. The solution felt as dangerous as the problem. She was right. 2 days later, as she was leaving her office, 2 people intercepted her before she reached the bus stop. They were not Nico's men. They were a man and a woman in plain clothes, their badges clipped to their belts. "Nora Jenkins," the woman said. She was sharp, with tired eyes and a no-nonsense haircut. "Special Agent Mara Quinn, FCID. We need a word." They didn't go to a car. They stood right there on the sidewalk. "We saw your little meeting at the vault the other day," Quinn said. "And we know you're going to his gala. That's good." "I don't know what you're talking about," Nora said, her blood running cold. "Don't," Quinn said, her voice dropping. "Just don't. We know your center's funding is up for review next month. That big city council grant, it's hanging by a thread. I can cut that thread with one phone call, or I can see to it that it's secured for the next 5 years. Nora felt the pavement tilt. "You're threatening my program. You're threatening those kids." "I'm offering you a choice." "Miss Jenkins," Quinn said, stepping closer. "Go to the gala. Wear a nice dress. And pay attention. We want a list. Who does Nico Veretti talk to? Who does he avoid? Who looks nervous? You're a social worker. You're good at reading people. Read them for us. Get us that list, and your kids are safe." Quinn handed her a business card. "You don't. And those kids are back on the street by Monday. Your call." Nora stood frozen on the sidewalk long after they had gone. She looked at the agent's card in her hand and then at her bag, where the heavy gala invitation sat. It was no longer a shield. It was a weapon, and it was pointed at her from 3 different directions: the glamorous public party, the dangerous private mafia, and the cold, ruthless federal government. The stage was set. She was in the game, and she had no idea how to win. The ballroom at the Riverside Crown was an assault on the senses. It was a cavern of crystal, gold leaf, and old money. A place so far removed from Nora's life that it felt like a different atmosphere. The air hummed with the quiet, confident murmur of the city's elite politicians, shipping magnates and their wives, draped in jewels that could fund Nora's entire program for a decade. She felt like a bird that had flown into the wrong window. Nora had spent 2 hours getting ready, a feat she hadn't attempted since her own college graduation. The dress was a rental, a floor-length sheath of deep, midnight blue silk that left her shoulders bare. It was simple, elegant, and the only thing she'd found that didn't make her feel like a child playing dress-up. Her hair was twisted into a complex knot at the base of her neck, a few strands escaping to frame her face. She was, as the invitation demanded, publicly presentable. She was also a fraud, a spy for the FCID, here to trade secrets for the survival of her kids. Nico Veretti was across the room, a fixed point of gravity in the swirling crowd. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo. He was in a bespoke black suit so perfectly tailored it looked more like armor. He was listening to a city councilman, his face a mask of polite interest, but his eyes were restless. Then they found her. He saw her the instant she paused at the grand archway. The councilman's words turned to white noise. Nico didn't just look. He stared. He had only ever seen her in cheap blazers and righteous fury. He had seen her covered in plaster dust, her face streaked with grime, shielding his nephew with her own body. He had not, until this second, seen the woman. He hadn't seen the graceful line of her neck or the way the dark blue silk clung to her hips. The ferocity was still there, banked in the nervous tension of her shoulders, but it was packaged in a devastatingly feminine form. He excused himself from the councilman with a curt nod and moved toward her. The crowd parted for him. Nora's heart leaped into her throat. He stopped a foot in front of her. His eyes raked over her, a slow, appreciative inventory that was both terrifying and intoxicating. "Miss Jenkins," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You are punctual. You sent a car. Mr. Veretti," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "It's hard to be late." He offered her a flute of champagne from a passing tray. She shook her head. "I'm working." A faint smile touched his lips. "So am I." The orchestra shifted from a classical piece to a slow, smoky ballad. He didn't ask. He didn't offer his hand. He simply said, "We need to be seen." He placed one hand on the small of her back. The shock of it was immediate, a jolt of pure heat that shot through the thin silk and directly into her spine. His skin was warm. He guided her onto the polished dance floor, his other hand taking hers, lacing their fingers together. He pulled her closer than was strictly necessary. She could smell his cologne, a clean, sharp scent of sandalwood and something metallic. They began to move, a slow, circling rhythm that was more of a negotiation than a dance. Nora stared at his lapel, trying to remember the faces of the people he'd greeted, trying to be Agent Quinn's good little spy. But it was impossible. His proximity was a drug. His thumb was making slow, almost imperceptible circles on her bare back. "You're nervous," he murmured, his lips near her ear. "This isn't my world. It's no one's world," he replied. "It's a stage. We just have to play our parts." To steady herself, she fell back on the one thing that was real. "I looked over the new intake files for the vocational program, the welding certifications. The funding is secure for the next quarter, but if we lose the city grant..." He stopped dancing. They were in the middle of the floor, and he just stopped. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable, almost amused. "You're here," he said, "in a rented dress, in a room full of sharks, dancing with me, and you are thinking about welding files." "It's what matters," she said, defensively. "Yes, it does." His gaze intensified. "That city grant you're worried about, the one that came through last April and saved your budget?" Nora was confused. "Yes, what about it?" "That was me." She stared at him, blankly. "What? The Ravenshore Waterfront Renewal Fund," he said, his voice quiet. "That's one of my foundations. I've been funding your program for nearly 2 years. Nora." He used her first name. It hit her with the force of a physical blow. Her entire worldview, the neat black and white boxes she lived in, shattered. The man she'd been told to hate, the man she was betraying, the man she'd categorized as a purely destructive force, had been the anonymous benefactor keeping her life's work alive. Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do that?" "You're not the only one who thinks kids deserve a way out," he said, his voice soft. "You do it with bus passes and paperwork. I do it. With money I can't explain." He was about to say more when it happened, a sharp crack. It wasn't a firework. It was high velocity. To Nora, it was just a sound. To Nico, it was a language. A woman screamed as a champagne flute on a tray 10 feet away exploded into a spray of crystal. "Boss Sniper Garage Roof!" Jax's voice was a roar. Time broke. Jax was already moving, shoving Nico toward the service corridor. But Nico didn't just move. His instincts were faster than thought. He didn't let go of Nora. His arm clamped around her waist like a steel band, and he used his own momentum to pull her with him, yanking her out of the line of fire. They burst through the double doors into a dark, metal-paneled service hallway. The sound of the screaming ballroom was instantly muffled. He didn't stop until he had her slammed against the cold steel wall. His body pressed fully against hers, his forearm braced by her head. The air was gone. All Nora could feel was the wall at her back and the solid, unyielding heat of his body from her knees to her chest. Adrenaline poured through her. He was breathing hard, the warm puffs of air hitting her temple. He was scanning the hallway, but she was trapped in his presence. She could feel the solid muscle of his chest, the buckle of his belt, the hard line of his thigh pressed against hers. "Are you all right?" he ground out, his voice a gravelly rasp. She managed to nod, her hands flat on his chest, though she didn't know if she was pushing him away or holding on. He looked down, his eyes, dark and wild, finding hers. He saw the terror in them, but as he held her gaze, he saw something else beneath the adrenaline, a deep, bone-weary fear that had been there long before the gunshot. A conflict. His voice dropped to a whisper, so intimate it vibrated through her. "Is someone pressuring you? Nora?" She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Her eyes, wide and terrified, told him everything. They told him about the threat, about the impossible choice she was in. The realization hit Nico like a bullet. His entire body went rigid. The muscle in his jaw clenched so hard she could see it jump. It wasn't Kellen. It wasn't his rivals. It was the feds. They were using her. They were squeezing her. And he, by pulling her into the light, had given them the lever. He didn't move for a second, then he pushed back, just an inch, his hand grabbing her arm. "Jax," the door flew open. "Cars ready, boss, sub-level." "Good." Nico didn't look back at the party. He only looked at Nora, his face a mask of cold fury. The night was over. He had to get her out of the city. He had to get her somewhere safe, somewhere the feds and Kellen Drake couldn't reach her. He had to fix the danger he had put her in. They drove for 2 hours, leaving the iron-gray sprawl of Ravenshore behind. Jax drove the first hour, then pulled into a dark service station, where a nondescript truck was waiting. Nico moved her from the sedan to the truck, his hand never leaving her arm. He drove the rest of the way himself. He was a focused, silent driver, handling the winding, unlit roads with an economy of motion that was almost hypnotic. Nora, still in her ruined gala dress, was wrapped in his overcoat. The adrenaline had long since faded, leaving behind a bone-deep chill and the humming, terrifying memory of his body pressed against hers in the hallway. They arrived at a small cabin, nestled deep in the wooded hills of what Nico called Briar Harbor. It wasn't a fortress. It was a home. It was old, made of dark wood, with a wide porch and a cold stone chimney. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. "Where are we?" she asked, her voice a croak. "A place my foster mother left me," he said, cutting the engine. "She was the only one. She liked the quiet." It was the most personal thing he had ever said. Inside, it was simple, clean, and warm. A deep leather sofa, handmade quilts, a large fieldstone fireplace, and a small, functional kitchen. It was the absolute opposite of the vault's calculated glamour. This place was real. Jax arrived in a separate vehicle about 30 minutes later. He didn't come inside. He unloaded 3 large duffel bags onto the porch supplies. Food and, Nora noted with a jolt, a locked aluminum case that did not look like it held groceries. He spoke to Nico in a low voice at the door. "Kellen's gone to ground," Jax said. "The feds are canvassing the hotel. You're both invisible right now, boss. I'll be back in 2 days. Call if it's hot." Then he was gone, and the silence of the woods descended. It was just the two of them. The duffel bags held clothes, simple, practical. Jeans, sweaters, t-shirts, they were her approximate size. He had thought of everything. "Go," he said, pointing to a small bathroom. "Get out of that dress." When she emerged, scrubbed clean, wrapped in a thick wool sweater, she found him in the kitchen. He had also changed into a simple black Henley and jeans. He looked younger. He looked human. He was rummaging through the bags of groceries Jax had brought. "I don't know about you," he said, his back to her, "but I'm starving." "I hope you're not expecting a restaurant." He pulled out flour, eggs, cheese, and a package of bacon. He found a cast-iron skillet. His movements sure. He was at home in this kitchen. Nora, feeling useless, stood by the sink. "I can help. You can wash," he said. Nodding to a small stack of dishes, they fell into a strange, domestic rhythm. She washed the old, mismatched plates, handing them to him to dry. He moved around the kitchen with a quiet competence, his large, calloused hands surprisingly gentle as he cracked eggs, his motions precise as he whisked them in a bowl. She watched his hands. They were the hands of a man who worked, but also of a man who had fought. Scarred knuckles, a long, thin white line across his palm. "Why do you do it?" he asked, his voice low, not looking up from the skillet where the bacon was sizzling. "Do what? Wash dishes. Risk your life for those kids, for Marco, for kids who, let's be honest, would probably steal your wallet." Nora paused, her hands in the warm, soapy water. "My father," she said, her voice quiet. "He was like them, but older. He got involved with a small-time crew back in Texas. Nothing sophisticated, not like this." She gestured vaguely. "He just ran numbers. He got in deep, owed the wrong man. He died in an alley over $2,000. She turned, her eyes finding his. "He wasn't a boss. He was just a guy who made a bad choice, and then another. No one ever offered him a way out. They just used him up. I do what I do. Because I keep looking for the kid my dad was, trying to give him the choice. No one gave my father." The kitchen was silent, save for the hiss of the pan. Nico stopped, the whisk still in his hand. He looked at her, his dark eyes searching. He turned off the flame. "Did you ever want a choice?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He leaned back against the counter, crossing his arms. He looked at the ceiling, as if pulling a memory from the rafters. "I was 16. I had an application filled out for the Maritime Academy. I liked maps. I wanted to navigate, see the world from the water, not just the port." He looked at his hands. "My uncle, the one who ran things before me, he was killed, a car bomb. My aunt, the family, they looked at me. I was the oldest male. I was the heir. There was no choice. There was just a debt, a responsibility." He met her gaze. "No one ever tried to pull me out, Nora. They just pushed me deeper in." Nora's heart ached. In that moment, he wasn't Nico Veretti, the portside boogeyman. He was the 16-year-old kid with an application. He was just like Marco. He was just like the kids in her program. Only no one had ever shown up to offer him a welding certification. He had started mixing something in a bowl again. Flour. He was making biscuits. He worked the dough, his brow furrowed in concentration. "You're a man of many talents," she said, trying to lighten the mood. He grunted, but a small smile played on his lips. He scooped a measure of flour, and a small white cloud puffed up, settling on her cheek. You've got," she said, gesturing to her own face. He looked up, his eyes fixed on the smudge of white on her cheekbone. The air in the kitchen changed. It became thick, heavy, electric. He stepped toward her, so slowly. He raised his hand, the one with the scarred knuckles. He hesitated, his fingers an inch from her skin. She didn't move. She didn't flinch. She barely breathed. His thumb, rough and warm, brushed the flour from her skin. It was the softest, most deliberate touch she had ever felt. His thumb lingered, tracing the line of her cheekbone. Her eyes fluttered closed. He didn't pull back. He leaned in, his other hand coming up to cup her jaw. His calloused palm was a brand against her skin. "Nora," he whispered. It was a question and a plea. He lowered his head and kissed her. It wasn't a soft, tentative kiss. It was a kiss of shared pain, of isolation, of two pasts colliding. It was desperate and deep, a claiming. Her hands, soapy and wet, found his shirt, bunching the fabric in her fists. He tasted like coffee and something wild, something dangerous. He broke the kiss, resting his forehead against hers. They were both breathing hard, their breath misting in the cool air of the cabin. "Why?" she started. "Why did you bring me here?" "Because it's the only safe place I know," he murmured. "The only place that's mine, not his." With a sudden, fluid movement, he slid his hands to her waist, lifted her as if she weighed nothing, and sat her on the worn wooden counter. He stepped between her legs, his body pressing into hers, trapping her against the wall. He was all heat and solid muscle. "Nico," she breathed, her hands sliding from his chest up into his hair. It was thick and soft. "Stay with me, Nora," he whispered against her mouth, his voice raw. "Just for tonight. No feds. No rivals. Just stay." He kissed her again, and this time there was no holding back. His mouth was demanding, hers was answering. His hands roamed, learning the shape of her, pulling her sweater aside to feel the warm skin beneath. She could feel the hard ridge of his belt buckle, the solid strength of his thighs pressing against her. It was a desperate, breathless exploration, a language of touch and quiet, broken moans. The night was theirs, a stolen sanctuary in the heart of the woods. The next morning, she woke up in his bed. The sheets were flannel, worn soft. He was already up. The smell of strong coffee and the bacon he'd been cooking filled the cabin. She found him on the porch, staring out at the mist-covered hills, a mug in his hand. He wore the same jeans, a thick cable-knit sweater, and his feet were bare on the cold wood. He turned as he heard her, and he smiled. It was not his boardroom smile. It was not his kingpin smile. It was a small, real, unguarded expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Coffee?" he asked. It felt normal, dangerously normal. They ate in silence, a comfortable, shared quiet. Later, wrapped in a quilt, she sat on the porch, her phone, which had been a useless brick, suddenly buzzed. One bar of service, a text message. It was encrypted, from a number she didn't recognize, but she knew who it was. It contained only one word: report. The cold, hard reality of Ravenshore crashed into her mountain sanctuary. The isolation was an illusion. The leash was still around her neck. The cabin felt like a hallucination. The second Jax's car dropped her back in the gray, diesel-choked reality of Ravenshore. The warmth, the scent of pine, the feel of his skin, it all evaporated. She was back in her life. Only her life was no longer hers. Agent Mara Quinn was waiting for her inside her apartment. "How was your vacation?" Quinn asked. She was leaning against Nora's kitchen counter, flipping through a stack of her mail. "What are you doing in my home?" Nora's voice was shaking, half with rage, half with fear. "We have a mutual acquaintance who picks locks," Quinn said dismissively. "You went dark. Miss Jenkins. We don't like that. You were at his private safe house. You were, intimate with him." It wasn't a question. Nora's face burned, a mix of shame and violation. "That's none of your business." "It's all of my business," Quinn snapped, her false pleasantry gone. "You've just become a compromised asset." She threw a manila folder onto the kitchen table. It spilled open. It was the DCR's budget proposal. A bright red line was drawn through the funding for her re-entry program. "The council just entered final review," Quinn said, her voice cold. "As of this morning, your program is non-essential. The grant is dead. All those kids you're so worried about, they're back on the street. Their files are being transferred to general probation." "You did this?" Nora whispered, the blood draining from her face. "I did, and I can undo it. But your window of opportunity is closing. You're close to him now. He trusts you." Quinn slid a tiny black plastic square across the table. It was magnetic, smaller than a quarter. "This is a military-grade GPS tracker. We need to know where he goes. We need his routes, his patterns, his sanctuaries. You're going to plant this on his personal vehicle? You do that, and I'll make a call. Your program gets funded for 5 years. You're asking me to—" "No, I won't," Nora said, but her voice was weak. "You will," Quinn said, packing her briefcase. "Because you're a good person, Nora, and good people are so easy to break. You'll sacrifice him to save them. It's what you do. You have 24 hours. The choice was a physical weight, pressing on her chest until she couldn't breathe. It was Nico, the man who had shown her his past, the man whose hands had been so gentle, the man she had slept beside, versus the kids, dozens of them, the Marcos of the world, the kids who were her father. She lasted 12 hours. She called him, her voice a hollow echo of itself. I left my charger at the cabin, the one I need for work. The lie tasted like acid, but he believed her. Jax will pick you up, he'd said, his voice warm, unsuspecting. I need you at the port office anyway. There's something I want to show you. Jax picked her up. He was polite, silent. He left the black armor-plated SUV running, the keys in the ignition, as he ran inside a coffee shop. Boss wants his usual, he'd grumbled. Her hand, holding the tiny tracker, was sweating so much it wouldn't stick. Her heart was a cold, panicked drum against her ribs. He's a criminal, she told herself. He's a killer. This is for the kids. This is the right thing to do. It felt like the wrongest thing she had ever done. She fumbled with the door, her eyes darting around the street. She dropped to one knee, as if tying her shoe, and reached under the passenger side wheel well. Her fingers found a flat, metal plate. With a sob catching in her throat, she pressed the tracker into the darkness. It clicked, magnetized. Done. She was back in the car, hands folded in her lap. When Jax returned, she felt diseased. Nico Veretti's private office, high above the shipping containers, was a fortress of glass and steel. He ran his empire from a place of paranoid efficiency. Every one of his personal vehicles was swept, electronically and physically, every single night. It was a standing rule, a non-negotiable. That evening, a full 3 hours after Jax had dropped a pale and silent Nora back at her apartment, his head of security walked into the office. He didn't speak. He just placed the small, black tracker in the center of Nico's immaculate, empty desk. Nico stared at it for a full minute. He didn't rage. He didn't break anything. A profound, freezing cold settled over him. He picked it up. He knew the make. He knew who used it. He drove to her apartment himself. When she opened the door, her face a mixture of surprise and a strange, hopeful guilt, he said only 2 words. Get your coat. The drive to the vault was silent. The bar was empty, closed for a private event. He didn't turn on the music. He walked behind the bar, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the large, empty room. He set the tiny tracker on the polished wood, right in front of her. How much did they offer you? His voice was dead, not angry, not hurt, just gone. It was the voice of a man confirming a ledger, a man who had already calculated the loss. Nico, how much? He repeated, his back to her, as he poured a single glass of whiskey. It wasn't the money, she burst out, the words desperate, choked. It was my program, they cut the funding. Quinn, Agent Quinn, she froze the grant. She said all my kids, they'd be... I had to choose. Nico. I had to choose them. He turned, slowly. His eyes were not the eyes of the man in the cabin. They were the eyes of the man at the shooting. Impassive, ancient, and utterly unreadable. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and the disappointment was so profound, so absolute, it was like a physical blow. They pressured me, she whispered, her voice breaking. I didn't want them to hurt you. I didn't want my kids to pay the price. He took a slow sip of his whiskey. So you saved them, by feeding me to the wolves. No, it wasn't like that. It was exactly like that, he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. He stepped out from behind the bar, closer to her. You think you're the first person they've squeezed. You think your kids are the only leverage they have. You made a choice. Nora, you chose them. Over me. He stopped, inches from her, so close she could feel the cold radiating from him. I can protect you from bullets, he said, his voice a raw whisper. I can protect you from Kellen Drake. I can build a wall around you so high the sun won't find you. He leaned in, his eyes drilling into hers, and the mask finally broke, revealing a flash of raw, exposed pain. I can protect you from the world out there. But if you're the one opening the door, if you are the one who lets them in, how am I supposed to protect us?" He put his hand on her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she didn't know she'd shed. His touch was cold. "How do I protect myself? From you?" He let his hand fall. The moment was broken. The trust was shattered. "Jax will take you home," he said, turning his back on her. The kingpin was back. The man gone. "The protective detail is pulled. You're on your own. Nico, please," she begged. "Go, Nora." His voice was final. She walked out of the vault, alone. The walk to her apartment had never felt so long. She was exposed. She had made her choice, and the cost was a loneliness so complete it hollowed her out. She didn't know that across the city. A low-level lookout for Kellen Drake, tasked with watching her apartment, made a call. "The details gone," the spotter said. "Veretti's men. They just pulled off. She's alone." Kellen Drake smiled. The civilian was finally vulnerable. Nora's phone buzzed an hour later. A blocked number, a video file. Her hands, already shaking, fumbled with the screen. It was her brother, Eli, her tough, ex-Marine, always in trouble younger brother. He was tied to a chair. His face was bruised, his lips split. He looked up at the camera, his eyes full of a fury she knew well. "Your new boyfriend plays rough." "Nora," Eli's voice, thick with pain, "tell him to back off." The video cut. A new text message appeared. "The brother for the boyfriend. A fair trade. You will bring me Nico Veretti. You will do it alone, or your brother comes home in a box. Your choice. Social worker." The video file was tiny. The impact was catastrophic. Nora watched it once, her stomach seizing so violently she had to grip the edge of her table. She watched it a second time, her professional calm, the part of her that handled crises, kicking in. It was Eli, her brother, the ex-Marine who still acted like he was invincible, now tied to a steel chair. He was in a warehouse, or a container. She recognized the high, corrugated steel walls behind him through a window coated in salt and grime. She could see the skeletal gantries of the Ravenshore shipworks. His face was a map of new bruises, his lips split. He was defiantly glaring at the camera, muscles straining against the zip ties. "Your new boyfriend plays rough. Nora." Eli spat, his voice thick. "Tell him to back off." A boot, unseen, slammed into his ribs. He grunted, folding, and the video cut to black. A second later, a text message from the blocked number appeared. "The brother for the boyfriend. A fair trade. You will bring me Nico Veretti. You will do it alone, or your brother comes home in a box. Your choice. Social worker." Nora's blood ran cold. She sank onto her sofa, her mind racing, processing the angles. She had 2 calls she could make, and both were a death sentence. She could call Agent Quinn. The FCID would be thrilled. They would use this. They would designate Nora a confidential informant, put a wire on her, and send her in. They would tell her they were prioritizing Eli, but he would be what they always called acceptable collateral. Quinn didn't save people. She leveraged them. Eli would die while they were busy reading Kellen his rights. The other call, the impossible one. She had to call Nico, the man she had betrayed. The man who had looked at her with such final, freezing disappointment. The man who had pulled his protection and left her vulnerable, which, she realized with a sickening lurch, was exactly what Kellen had been waiting for. Her choice wasn't a choice. It was a consequence. Her fingers, numb and shaking, dialed the number from the cabin. It rang once, twice, a third time. She was about to hang up, convinced he would let it ring forever, when the line clicked. "Nora," his voice was flat, hollow, the voice of a man confirming an invoice. "He has my brother," she said, the words tumbling out, choked with a sob she couldn't suppress. "Kellen Drake. He has Eli. He has him at the shipworks. He sent me a video. He said I have to come, and I have to bring you alone." She waited for the accusation. She waited for the "I told you so." She waited for the click of him hanging up. There was a 3-second pause, a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight. Then his voice returned, and it was a different voice entirely. The cold, empty man was gone, replaced by the kingpin. It was sharp, cold, and absolute. "Send me the coordinates," he commanded. "Text me the video and send me the location data. Do not leave your apartment, do not call anyone else. And Nora, do not go there yourself. Do you understand me?" "Yes," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Send it, now." The line went dead. The call was her unspoken apology. It was her confession. And his response, his immediate, unquestioning pivot to action, was his admission. Despite the tracker, despite the betrayal, she was still his to protect. Nico Veretti looked at the coordinates. He was in his office above the vault. Jax stood by the door. "Kellen has her brother," Nico said, his voice quiet. Jax, who had been inspecting a new shipment, went completely still. "It's a trap. He's using her to get to you." "Obviously," Nico said, unlocking a case and checking the magazine of a sleek, black pistol. "He's emotional. That makes him sloppy. Get the team. 10 men, full tactical gear. We go in dark. And the hostage. Kellen wants me. He'll keep the brother alive to make the trade." Nico snapped the magazine home, the sound final. "But he's not just dealing with me tonight." He picked up a separate burner phone and dialed a number he had memorized from Nora's stolen call logs. It was a direct line. "Agent Quinn." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Mr. Veretti, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "You want Kellen Drake," Nico said, cutting her off. "You want the man who shot up my gala, the man running unregistered arms through the north side. He's at the Ravenshore Shipworks. Container B-12. He's there right now, holding a civilian hostage." "A civilian," Quinn's voice was sharp, instantly suspicious. "The social worker. Nora Jenkins. It's her brother. He'll be surrounded by his top men. I imagine that's a bust you'd like to make." "Why are you giving me this?" "Veretti." "Because he's on my territory, touching my people," Nico said, his voice a lethal rasp. "And I'm feeling generous. You want him be there in 20 minutes. Come in loud. I'm sure you can take it from there." He hung up before she could say another word. Jax raised an eyebrow. "The feds." "Kellen wants me to come alone," Nico said, shrugging on a dark jacket. "He's getting me, my team, and an FCID strike force. Let them be the perimeter. They can clean up the mess. We just want 2 things, the brother and Kellen." The Ravenshore Shipworks was a graveyard of steel. Rusting cranes stood like sentinels against the watery moon, and thousands of containers were stacked in dark, metallic canyons. The wind howled, carrying the taste of salt and iron. Nico's black SUV killed its lights a mile out. He had picked Nora up on a dark corner, pulling her into the passenger seat without a word. Now, in the sudden silence, he turned. He opened the back, pulling out 2 heavy tactical vests. He handed one to Jax. The other, he held out to Nora. She stared at it. "I'm not staying in the car." "You are," he said. "Put it on." "No," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "I am not. Eli is in there because of me. You are in there because of me. I betrayed you. I broke this. I was stupid. I am the reason this is happening. I am not going to hide in a car while you fix it. I dragged you into this. Nico, I have to stand there." He studied her face in the gloom. He saw the raw terror, but beneath it, he saw the iron. The same stubborn, reckless iron that had made her shield his nephew. The same will that had made her confront him in his own bar. He didn't argue. He just nodded. Once. "Fine," he said. He grabbed the vest from her hands and shoved it over her head, his movements rough, impersonal. He yanked the heavy Velcro straps at her sides, cinching them so tight she gasped. "But you stay on my 6, he commanded, his voice a low growl near her ear, his breath warm. "You do not speak. You do not move unless I move. You become my shadow. Am I clear?" "Clear," she breathed, her heart hammering against the heavy ceramic plate. "Jax, we're dark. 3 minutes." The team fanned out, ghosts in the night. The only light came from a single, isolated container, glowing yellow. The target. Nico moved, and Nora moved with him, her hand gripping the back of his vest, her feet matching his, stepping where he stepped. The air was electric, tasting of metal. Every scrape of gravel, every metallic groan of the cranes in the wind, felt like a trigger. They were walking into the lion's mouth, and Nora could only pray they weren't the ones about to be devoured. Nico moved like a panther, a creature of the industrial night. Nora stayed latched to his back, her hand fisted in the nylon of his vest, her feet making no sound. Jax and 2 other men had already fanned out, disappearing into the labyrinth of steel canyons. The only sound was the wind, a high, lonely shriek as it whipped off the water. The target container, B-12, was lit up from the inside. A single, garish yellow box in the darkness. The main doors were wide open. From their cover behind a stack of empty pallets, Nora could see inside. It was just as the video had shown. Eli was there, strapped to a steel chair in the center of the container, his head bowed, his face a mess of bruises. Above him, on a rusty iron catwalk that ran along the warehouse's inner wall, stood Kellen Drake. Kellen was flanked by 4 men, all holding rifles, their postures relaxed. He was smoking, looking down at Eli with casual contempt. He was expecting a trade, a negotiation, a one-on-one. Nico held up a hand, signaling his men to hold. He stepped out from the shadows, alone, his hands empty and held at his sides. He kept Nora behind him, shielded by his body. "Kellen," Nico's voice boomed, sharp and clear, cutting through the wind. "This is between you and me. Let the boy go." Kellen spun. His relaxed posture vanished, replaced by a snake-like coil of rage. He stared, not just at Nico, but at the shadows behind him. You brought people," he hissed, his voice cracking with disbelief. He had expected a man, desperate and alone. He got a king. And you brought the girl. He let out a bark of a laugh, a sound with no humor. "Veretti, for one little social worker, you're willing to risk the whole damn port." Kellen raised his own pistol and fired a single shot. It wasn't aimed at them. It was a punctuation. The bullet sparked off the concrete 20 feet to their left. "You think you're walking out of here. Nico with him, with her." Nora could feel the vibration of Nico's body, the coiled tension. He was buying time. She could hear the faint, distant sound of vehicles, motors cut, doors closing, the feds. "Let's make a deal, Kellen," Nico called out, taking one slow step forward, forcing Kellen's eyes back to him. "You're boxed in. You don't want this fight. Let the brother go, and we can talk about the north side routes. You can have them." "Deal," Kellen shrieked. "You're offering me deals. I'm the one holding the cards." Outside the perimeter, Mara Quinn held her hand up, stopping her team. "Wait," she whispered to her second. "Let them engage. We take them both. Let them do the dirty work." Kellen was losing control. He hated being played. He motioned to one of his men on the catwalk. "Put a hole in the brother. Just a small one. Let's see how much he wants to deal." "No," Nora screamed, starting to move. Nico's arm shot back, a steel bar across her chest, holding her in place. The movement was her undoing. A 5th man, one Nora hadn't seen, was perched on a stack of containers to their right, a sniper with a perfect angle. He had been watching, waiting. When Nora moved, his sights, which had been on Nico, shifted. He saw her. He recognized the value, the woman, the weakness. He adjusted his aim. Nico saw it, not the man. He saw the glint of the scope, a tiny flicker of moonlight on glass. He saw it moving, shifting, locking. Not on him, but on the space where Nora stood. His entire world compressed to that single, deadly point of light. "Nora!" "Down," he roared, spinning, his body turning to become a human shield, to put his own vest between her and the bullet he knew was coming. Time broke. Nora saw him turn. She saw his face, not as a boss, not as a killer, but as a man, terrified for her. Moving to take the shot meant for her. Her brain didn't process the order. Her body did, her father dying in an alley, her helpless Marco under a hail of bullets, her shielding. This was her instinct. As he turned to cover her, she didn't duck, she didn't hide. She launched, she threw herself forward, her hands slamming into his chest, shoving him backward, and in that same fluid, reckless motion, she stepped directly in front of him. The crack of the high-velocity round was deafening. It wasn't a scream, it was a gasp, a sudden, violent expulsion of air. She felt a thud, a monstrous, heavy punch to her left shoulder that had no pain, just impact. It spun her around, throwing her off her feet. She didn't hit the ground. He caught her. Nico's face was a mask of pure, uncomprehending horror. He had seen the rifle. He had moved to block, and she had pushed him. She had taken it. She fell into his arms, a dead weight, her head lolling back, his shirt, where her shoulder slumped against his chest, instantly turned dark, warm and wet. "No," he breathed. Not a word, a prayer. The world exploded. Nico roared, a sound that was not human. He grabbed her, pulling her down behind a rusted, discarded winch, his own body curling around her. With one hand, he unholstered his pistol. With the other, he clamped down on her shoulder, feeling the torn muscle, the hot, slick blood pouring through her clothes. He pressed his lips to her ear, his body shaking, his voice a guttural whisper, choked with a rage and a terror so profound it tore him apart. "Why would you do that?" She was fading, the world turning gray and distant, but she heard him. She tasted copper. Her chest was on fire. She turned her face toward his, her eyes struggling to focus. "Because," she gasped, her hand coming up, her bloody fingers weakly gripping his jacket, "because you matter." The dam broke. FCID federal agents, hands in the air, hands in the air. Flashbangs detonated, turning the container yard into a day-lit hell of white light and screaming. The feds, forced to move in when they saw a civilian hit, stormed the compound from 3 sides. Nico didn't see them. He only saw her, but he heard the chaos. It was his element. He saw Kellen Drake, scrambling from the catwalk, trying to escape in the confusion. Nico's vision went red. He rose from his crouch, Nora still sheltered by his legs, and his pistol came up. He didn't fire to kill. He fired to end. 2 shots, so fast they sounded like one. Pop, pop. The first took Kellen in the thigh, shattering his femur. The second hit his shoulder, spinning him off the stairs. He went down, a screaming, broken heap. The yard was suddenly, shockingly silent, save for the boots of the federal agents. Nico was still crouched, one hand on Nora's wound, his pistol smoking. Jax and his men were in a tight, defensive circle, guns down but ready. And facing them, a semicircle of 20 FCID agents, their weapons all trained, not on Kellen, but on him. Mara Quinn stepped through the line, her gun steady, her face grim. "Nico Veretti, you're under arrest." His entire operation, his men, his weapons, his war, all of it was laid bare, exposed in the harsh, flashing blue and red lights of the federal government. The world was reduced to flashing lights, red, blue, slicing through the cold night air. The sharp, sterile scent of an antiseptic wash hit Nora's nose, and she heard a voice, calm and detached. "Ma'am, stay with me. You're going to be okay. The bullet passed through. We're going to get you out of here." A federal medic was pressing a thick bandage to her shoulder, the pain a dull, thudding fire that was slowly waking up. But the pain was distant. All she could feel was the unyielding grip on her right hand. Nico was still there. He was crouched beside her, his suit jacket gone, his white shirt stained with her blood. His face was a mask of cold, controlled fury. He was ignoring the circle of federal agents, their guns still pointed, his entire focus a laser beam on the medic's hands. Mara Quinn stepped into the light, her face grim. She had Kellen Drake in cuffs, his leg a ruin, and now she had this. She had Veretti, red-handed at the scene of a shootout with a civilian casualty. She had won. "Medics, get her prepped for transport," Quinn commanded. To her agents, she said, "Get him away from her." 2 agents moved toward Nico. "Sir, step back." Nico didn't even look at them. His eyes snapped to Mara Quinn. He spoke, and his voice was not the growl of a mob boss, but the quiet, precise tone of a surgeon. "You don't want me," he said. Quinn stopped. "Excuse me, I have you for aggravated assault, conspiracy, and about 20 other felonies I can think of before my coffee gets cold." "You have Kellen," Nico said, nodding to the groaning man being dragged away. "That's a good bust, a career maker. You want more." He never let go of Nora's hand. "You want my entire operation." he said, his voice dropping so only Quinn could hear. "You want the names of my offshore accounts. You want the shipping routes I use, the other things that pass through my port. You want the politicians I own and the unions I control? I'll give them to you. All of them. My entire ledger." Quinn went dead still. She had spent 5 years trying to get a single wiretap on this man. He was offering her the kingdom. In exchange for what, she whispered, the raw ambition in her eyes warring with her suspicion. "In exchange," Nico said, "I am processed as a cooperating witness, but that's not the price." He looked down at Nora. Her eyes were open, hazy with pain, but she was listening. "The price," Nico said, his voice raw, "is her and her brother." "Nora Jenkins and Eli Jenkins are placed into immediate, top-tier witness protection. Not here. Not in this state. You will make them ghosts. You will give them new lives, new identities, and you will do it tonight. They will be untouchable. By my enemies, by my friends, by anyone. That's the deal. My empire. For her life." Nora's head, though heavy, turned. "Nico." She breathed, the word a bubble of pain. "No, don't. You don't have to. Not for me." He finally looked at her, and the cold mask broke. His eyes were filled with a terrible, aching tenderness. He squeezed her hand, a final, desperate pressure. "Anda otrong kwok choi hai moi nam," he said, his voice thick. "I've been in this game for 20 years. If it ends, if this is how I get out..." He met her eyes. "Let it end for you, Nora. Let it be for you." Quinn, watching this, made the calculation. The Veretti organization, dismantled in one night without a single shot fired by her team. All for a social worker. It was the best deal she would ever make. "Done," Quinn said. "You have my word. We'll take your full debriefing and they'll be on a plane by sunrise." She nodded to the medics. "Get her out of here. Now." Across the yard, federal agents cut the zip ties on Eli Jenkins. He stumbled free, dazed, his ribs aching. He looked across the chaos just as the medics brought the stretcher for Nora. He saw what he would never be able to unsee: Nico Veretti, the mythical, terrifying boss of the port, gently lifting his sister, his hands impossibly tender, helping to settle her onto the stretcher, his blood-stained shirt a stark contrast to her pale face. As Kellen Drake was being dragged past, cuffed and broken, he saw the tableau. He saw Nora, her eyes locked on Nico. He saw Nico, surrendering his entire world. Kellen stopped, pulling against the agents, a final, bitter laugh bubbling in his chest. "A social worker," he spat, his voice full of gravel and hate. A goddamn social worker. She brought down the whole port." Nico walked beside the stretcher as the medics wheeled Nora toward the ambulance, his hand still holding hers. He didn't let go until they reached the open doors. He leaned down, ignoring the agents, ignoring the entire world. He pressed his lips to her forehead, a touch that was both a farewell and a vow. "Be safe, Nora," he whispered against her skin. Then he let her hand go. He stood back, watching as they loaded her in. The doors closed, a final, terrible sound. Nora, through the small, tinted window, watched him. He turned, his back straight, his shoulders set. He looked like a king, even in his defeat. He walked, not as a prisoner, but as a man going to a conclusion. He stopped directly in front of Mara Quinn. He didn't wait for her command. He didn't wait for the agent to step forward, his eyes still locked on the back window of the ambulance as it began to pull away. "We're full of her." And he held out his hands, wrists together, offering them Nora's last image, before the morphine took her and the ambulance rounded the corner, was of the man who had just sacrificed his entire world for her, standing in the flashing lights, as a federal agent snapped the cold, silver handcuffs around his wrists. 6 months. 6 months since the container yard. 6 months since the smell of blood and antiseptic, and the last image she had of Nico Veretti, standing tall as the handcuffs closed around his wrists. Nora Jenkins ceased to exist on a Tuesday. Her new identity was plain, unremarkable. She now lived in Sierra Cove, Colorado, a tiny mountain town where the snow came early and the past felt 1,000,000 miles away. She was under an expanded federal protection program, a ghost. She had a small, warm cabin, a secure internet connection, and a job consulting remotely for re-entry programs in other states. She was safe. She was hollow. 2 weeks ago, a new business had opened on the town's quiet main street. It was a small, one-room office with a freshly painted sign, Sierra Community Freight Consulting. The name on the business license read Nicholas Vance. Nora had seen the sign. She'd even seen him, once, from a distance, loading a box into a truck. He looked different, thinner. Maybe, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans, not a bespoke suit. He looked like just another man trying to start over. She hadn't approached him. She couldn't. The terms of her new life were clear, but this morning, the snow was falling in thick. Silent curtains when she heard the crunch of boots on her wooden porch. Her heart did a familiar, sick lurch, the old Ravenshore reflex. She looked through the peephole, her hand already halfway to her phone. It was him. He was just standing there, wearing a thick, dark coat, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. He wasn't looking at the door. He was looking at his feet, as if he might turn and leave. He looked awkward, hesitant. This wasn't the kingpin of the port. This wasn't the man who had faced down federal agents. This was just a man who had walked through the snow, hoping. She pulled the door open. The freezing air rushed in, a cloud of white. He looked up, and his eyes, those dark, intense eyes that had haunted her dreams, were unguarded. They were full of a quiet, nervous energy. "Hi," he said. His voice was rough. "Nico," she breathed, her hand gripping the door frame. "It's Nicholas Vance," he said, offering a small, almost shy shrug. "The feds aren't very creative. You're not supposed to be here," she said, but there was no heat in the words. "I know. Can I come in? It's cold." She stepped aside. He filled the small room, bringing the scent of pine and cold air with him. He took off his coat, revealing a simple dark sweater. He looked around the small cabin, at her books, her laptop, the simple furniture. "They did this for you," he said, his voice quiet. "It's safe," she replied, which was all that mattered. "You shouldn't be here, Nico. The deal. Eli is safe. I'm safe. You were." "I was," he agreed, turning to face her. "I did the time. 6 months. I debriefed for 8 weeks straight. I gave them every account, every route, every dirty politician, every last piece of Kellen Drake's network. I held nothing back." He walked closer to the small fireplace, warming his hands. "I'm on probation. 5 years of it. I have to report to a federal marshal once a week. I can't leave the state of Colorado. And I am forbidden from contacting anyone, and I mean anyone, from my former life." Nora frowned, pulling her robe tighter. "But I'm from your former life. You're here. You're violating your parole just by standing here." "No," he said, and a small, tired smile touched his lips. "I'm not." "When they gave me the terms, I accepted all of them. The forfeiture of assets, the travel restrictions, the reporting. I signed it all. And then I told them I had one condition for my placement." He looked at her, and his gaze was so intense it made her skin warm. "I told them I didn't care where they put me, as long as it was Sierra Cove. They argued. They said it was a conflict. I told them the only thing I didn't want to lose was you, and that if I was going to be Nicholas Vance, he was going to live here." He took a hesitant step toward her. "They finally agreed on one condition, that you agreed too, that you weren't under duress, that I am not, and never will be, a threat to you." Nora's eyes traced the lines of his face, the new, faint lines of stress around his eyes. She was wearing a long-sleeved shirt, but she subconsciously rubbed her left shoulder. The scar was still there, a raised, angry knot of tissue under her skin. His gaze dropped to her hand, following the motion. "Does it? Only when it's cold," she whispered. He reached out. Not his hand, but just his fingers. So slowly. He didn't touch her skin. He just brushed the thick fabric of her shirt, right over the scar. His touch was a question. "I'm sorry, Nora, for all of it. You didn't shoot me, Nico." "No," he said, his voice rough. I just gave them the bullet." He let his hand drop. The silence stretched, filled only by the crackle of the fire. "So," she said, trying to find the ground beneath her feet. "Sierra Community Freight Consulting. What's that?" He actually looked embarrassed. "It's logistics. Just legal. Clean. Using my experience for scheduling. Optimizing routes for local farms. It's quiet." "And you?" he asked. "I'm teaching. Online. Helping set up vocational programs for ex-cons. Legal. Clean." A slow smile spread across his face. A real one. One she had only seen in the cabin. "So, we're just doing what we're good at. The right way." He stepped toward her. And this time, he didn't stop. He slid his arms around her waist, pulling her gently against him. He wasn't the hard, demanding man from Ravenshore. He was just Nico. He buried his face in her hair, and she felt his body shudder. A single, controlled release of 6 months of tension. "I missed you," he murmured, his voice thick. "I'm right here," she said, her own arms wrapping around his back, holding him. They stood like that for a long time, just breathing. The kitchen was warm. The world outside was white and silent. Nora tilted her head back, a small, teasing smile on her lips. "You know, if the people in this town find out who we are, they're going to have questions. They might even ask why I was stupid enough to jump in front of a bullet for a mafia boss." He cut her off. His lips met hers. It was not the kiss from the cabin kitchen, which had been fire and adrenaline. It was not the kiss at the gala, which had been a question. This kiss was slow. It was deep. It was full of gratitude and safety and a profound, bone-deep relief. It tasted like coffee in the cold, clean air of the mountains. It was a kiss that meant home. When he pulled back, he rested his forehead against hers, his eyes searching her face. He was stripped bare, no power, no crew, no empire, just a man with a 5-year leash. He whispered the words, the same 4 words he had screamed at her in the container yard, but the meaning was entirely, devastatingly new. It wasn't an accusation. It was a question he would never stop asking. "Why would you do that? Why would you choose me? Why would you save me? Why would you, who deserves so much better, still be here?" Nora smiled, her hand coming up to cup his jaw, feeling the slight stubble. "Because you finally chose the hard road." The past was not gone. They both knew, in the back of their minds, that a federal marshal was watching this house, that their freedom was a fragile, conditional thing. But as the snow fell, they had a small cabin, 2 new names, and a second chance they had paid for in blood and sacrifice. And for the first time, it was enough. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to Mafia Boss Stories, like this video, and give us an extra boost by hitting the hype button to help this story reach even more listeners.